everyone. My name is Representative Esther Agbaje, and I represent House District 59B, covering North Minneapolis and parts of downtown Minneapolis. So I'm excited to continue the discussion of the bill that both Senator Boldon and I are carrying in both the House and the Senate. In the House file 685, and what the House version does is it prohibits certain corporations and limited liability companies from purchasing single-family homes to make them rental properties. And we will be hearing that later today in the Housing Committee. So this bill has gone through some changes. We've clarified the types of corporations that would be limited. We've allowed for a slightly larger threshold as to where a corporation would be before a corporation would be in violation of the law. And we also expanded the types of groups that would be exempted from the proposal, including nonprofits, trusts, and builders. The remedy that we've proposed is that to try to put more people into home ownership by encouraging the sale of the excess property, and so that way tenants would have the first opportunity to purchase. So I'm grateful for all those who are involved in reshaping the bill and willing to continue conversations as this bill makes its way through the legislative process. And part of the reasons we brought this bill is because, unfortunately, after the collapse of the housing market in 2008, we've seen some distortions in the market, and we're seeing those effects today. One of that is that corporations began entering the single-family rental market, perhaps as a way to stabilize their own portfolios. But over time, this has proven detrimental in many parts of the country, and here in Minnesota, where individual families are priced out of the buyer market because of all the cash bids that many of these corporations use to purchase large numbers of properties. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minnesota, in part of Minneapolis, particularly in the northeast area and downtown, investors now own more than 30% of single-family houses, and in Fridley and Hopkins, close to 25% of single-family houses are owned by an investor who does not live there. St. Paul and Minneapolis are also up to 6.1% and 6.7% of single-family homes that are owned by corporations. And while overall those numbers might seem a little small, we know that we need to act so that this does not become a problem that becomes too big to handle. With the measures in this bill, we look to create a more balanced market where every Minnesotan has an equitable opportunity at achieving home ownership. By limiting the amount that corporations can purchase for rentals in this market, we want more homes available for people. And while corporate ownership isn't the only factor driving up housing costs, it is one, and that we believe that if we take action can start to help bring some of those prices down. Additionally, local ownership of homes by residents or smaller landlords can lead to improved neighborhood stability. Residents who own have a vested interest in maintaining the community, fostering increased investment in property upkeep, and a reduced tenant turnover. A bill like this can keep more homes on the market available for actual people and bring us to a time when home ownership was closer in reach for more families. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker, Asale Sol, the Executive Director of Urban Homeworks.
Greetings, my name is Asale Sol Young, that's A-S-A-L-E, capital S-O-L-Y-O-U-N-G. As Rep. Agbaje stated, I'm the Executive Director of Urban Homeworks. We are a affordable housing nonprofit where our mission is to lead the fight for housing justice so that all people may have a safe, stable, and dignified place to live. Our vision is housing justice for all. We are an affordable housing developer and community-centered landlord that places all residents and the communities that we work in at the center of our stable housing and policy and equity work. I'm here to advocate for House File 685 as an imperative bill in the fight for economic and housing justice. Rep. Agbaje shared a lot of really great data. I'm going to reiterate some of that data because it shows us that the entire state of Minnesota will benefit from boundaries placed on investors coming into our communities to purchase single-family homes simply for the sake of increasing their profits. And while this issue of investor-owned single-family homes affects all Minnesotan communities, the most impacted today are those who have historically been left out of the opportunity of stability and wealth building through home ownership for generations. House File 685 addresses some of the most hidden yet insidious aspects of systemic housing injustice, lack of access as well as lack of affordability. And the power of this bill is that it will not only impact home ownership opportunities, it will also positively transform accessibility and affordability in the rental housing space. Studies show that investor-owned property is often less cared for, leaving tenants to make improvements themselves to ensure some semblance of dignity for their families. Investor-owned property is too often undignified and inhumane. A family housing fund report showed that many North Minneapolis renters, as an example, are living in properties in desperate need of repair, too often with unresponsive landlords. 68% of those same households are also experiencing high code violations. If I view your housing as my investment, my priority is not your well-being. My priority is maximizing the return on my investment. And while our focus at Urban Homeworks is North Minneapolis, I must continue to emphasize that this is a statewide issue. A recent report by the Minnesota Federal Reserve demonstrates the increase of investor ownership across the state of Minnesota. Specifically, in North Minneapolis, investor ownership grew to over 20% by 2021. In 2022, investor-owned single-family homes reached 25,000 detached homes in the 7-county Twin Cities region. Of those homes, 1/3 were in Minneapolis and St. Paul and communities like North. The Reserve also reported similar growth patterns in northern suburbs such as Fridley, where investor ownership is at nearly 30%, as well as in places like Chanhassen and Stillwater, where it's upwards of 15%. The growing volume of investor-owned single-family homes across Minnesota becomes a modern-day redlining issue. The cost of renting investor-owned property is more likely to set rental prices at market rate rather than at affordability levels based on median income for that community, increasing the likelihood of cost-burden families. It also severely decreases the number of available single-family homes, which contributes to the inaccessible cost of home ownership, particularly for first-time buyers. There is a negative impact that investor ownership is having on communities such as North Minneapolis, where, as I have stated, investor ownership is occurring at over 20%. Not only does this prevent many BIPOC families from building wealth through home ownership, but it extracts income from hardworking Minnesota families and puts it into the pockets of corporations who do not reside in those communities and too often don't even reside in the state of Minnesota. House File 685 would give all Minnesotans the fighting chance they deserve to achieve family housing stability as well as the dream of homeownership. Thank you.
Hello, my name is B, just like the letter, Rosas, R-O-S-A-S. I'm a volunteer with the Defend Glendale and Public Housing Coalition in Minneapolis. The conversion of single-family homes negatively affects many residents in Minneapolis, but it has been specifically harming public housing tenants. These tenants pay 30% of their income towards their rent. The conversion of single-family homes in programs like Section 18 and the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, or otherwise known as RAD, transfer ownership of these units to corporate developers, leading them to be demolished and converted into downsized housing that can no longer be affordable to these public housing tenants. These two programs are used when there's a lack of funding or lack of sources of funding for repairs and renovations, even if some of these units have been recently renovated or aren't in any need of it. This is the case for Elliott Twins, that's close to Cedar Riverside. These units have been recently renovated and they're being rehabilitated yet again. What's going on in Elliott Twins is that this is leading to their housing being privatized. Once their housing gets demolished for the purpose of renovation, it gets transferred to ownership of these corporate developers. And what we're also seeing is that a lot of these residents have been rejecting these proposals, but the city of Minneapolis is still selling these units to outside investors like Royal Bank of Canada. So again, these folks are not in Minnesota and instead are outside developers coming in and buying a lot of these units. Through Section 18, this type of discrimination happens to public housing tenants that live in single-family homes, otherwise known as scatter sites. And they get denied any opportunity to purchase these homes once they get sold to private corporations. The city continues to build partnership with these corporate entities or even create their own in order to sell these homes, even if residents have been living there for years. So far, this has impacted over 736 families in Minneapolis. These conversions do nothing to help families in Minnesota, and they create barriers for them to access housing. On top of that, they have led to extreme rent increases and the displacement of residents, especially public housing residents, whom are elderly, Black, undocumented, and extremely poor. Corporate ownership of our housing only intensifies our current housing crisis, and House File 685 would help us in dealing with this issue sooner rather than later.
Good afternoon. I'm Senator Liz Boldon. I represent District 25, which is most of Rochester and some areas just north of Rochester. I am the proud author of Senate File 365, which is the Senate companion to the House bill that will be heard today. For too many Minnesotans, homeownership is out of reach, whether it's because of skyrocketing housing costs, stagnated wage growth, or lack of adequate housing supply. Ordinary folks are at a disadvantage when it comes to buying homes. Last session, DFLers tackled the housing supply issue and expanded the rights of tenants, but there is still much more we can and need to do. This bill is another important piece of the puzzle. Corporations have been buying up single-family homes at an alarming rate, and a disproportionate number of these purchases are happening in neighborhoods occupied predominantly by people of color and low-income households. As mentioned, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, it's estimated that large investors account for about 54% of single-family rentals in the Twin Cities area as of 2022, and very large investors with over 50 properties in their portfolio accounted for 10% of the market share. In fact, not only are we seeing this harmful practice in the metro area, but it is happening across the state. Homeownership is perhaps the best opportunity for economic mobility and intergenerational wealth. If we allow these corporate entities to buy up more and more of our supply of single-family homes and convert them into rental properties, young families in Minnesota won't be afforded these chances. It's virtually impossible for new families to compete with the deep pockets of these faceless investors. More concerning, there's no reason to believe these corporations will stop until they own as much as they can. The reality is that monopolies are profitable for shareholders, and when the only concern is pulling in revenue for your investors, they will swallow as much of the market share as possible. The harsh reality makes it easy to see why residents and tenants get neglected. These corporate entities often show little to no care for the hardworking folks they collect rent checks from. We have heard horror stories about absent landlords who let gas leaks go unfixed for days, and lucrative rent increases that price families out of their homes. Single-family homes should not be used as financial assets to increase shareholder value. A home is a family's anchor to a neighborhood, an investment in the community, and an opportunity for economic stability and prosperity. I am very grateful to my partners in this work, Rep. Agbaje and Chair Howard and Chair Port in the Senate, as well as advocates and Minnesotans who tell us across the state that this is an issue for them that they are asking us to fix. So I'm proud to be carrying this bill and having it move forward this session. And with that, I will turn it over to Chair Howard.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Howard, and I'm the chair of our Housing Committee in the Minnesota House. I want folks to put yourselves in the shoes of a family. They're searching for a home in the community they desire. They've been searching for months and months because there's just not that supply. There's not that house that fits their family needs. And then they see that perfect house come on the market. They're so excited. It fits what they need. They're prepared. They're ready. They make a competitive offer, even above list price, because they want it so much, and they lose out, and they find out they lost out to a hedge fund that's from New York City who makes an all-cash offer and purchase the house. That's what this bill is seeking to address. A playing field where too often large corporate entities are using their power, their leverage, their resources to purchase single-family homes when Minnesotans desperately need those homes. We think we need to balance that playing field more, and really the goal of our work in the Housing Committee this session is to create more housing choices, more housing opportunities, more chances for Minnesotans to have the American dream of owning a home. As folks have mentioned, we have deep disparities in terms of home ownership in our state, one of the worst in the country. And this bill is squarely focused on helping to narrow those gaps and make sure that every Minnesotan has an opportunity to buy a home. And with that, I would turn it over to questions.
Senator Boldon, you mentioned that 54% of metro rental properties are owned by large investors. Are all of those corporations or LLCs that would fall under this bill?
So, yeah, so the stat is, yes, 54% of single-family rentals in the Twin Cities, large investors. So, and the language is a little bit different in the House version, the Senate version, and we'll work on those, in conference committee as we hopefully get there. The bill really is tailored to the very large investors, those who, again, we're starting with the very large investors who have those big portfolios. So, and also just to be clear, what this is not aimed at is mom and pop landlords who, maybe have a couple of, units in their portfolio, just, trying to, support their family. It really is geared at the very large investors and very large corporations who are doing this practice.
So in this case, large investors is corporations and LLCs.
Correct.
It's 10 or more in the House bill.
Yes, it is currently 10 or more in the House bill. Of course, there are ongoing conversations about where that number should be, but that's where we at least wanted to start the conversation.
Is there anything to stop, one corporate entity from creating a new LLC and buying up 10 more?
Yeah, I mean, they can definitely do that. I think over time it becomes an administrative burden for that business, but I mean, if that's something that they want to do, right now, the current language would not prevent that, but we have talked about that scenario and are looking at ways to try to disincentivize that.
Mechanism to track the buildings that are owned by different separate LLCs that have that same beneficial owner?
We do have kind of patchwork tracking systems across different counties and cities in the state of Minnesota. There is actually another bill that was introduced this year that would create a statewide database of landlords. So hopefully if that one also passes, that could be a complement to this bill.
I would just add to that, in the Senate version of our bill, there is a mechanism for disclosure to get at that very thing, so people know, who these corporations, who really does own the unit.
Builders say this would discourage them from developing new areas, so can you address whether that's a concern for you?
Well, in the House version of the bill, we've exempted builders, so they would not fall under the provisions of this bill, so they would be free to build. What we would hope is that they're building with cities and other entities that are looking to create those homes for home ownership rather than rental.
I would say it's the same on the Senate side. We've exempted builders.
Is there a sense that a lot of these cash buys are being done at the sheriff's sale foreclosure point, or just on the open market as people list houses for sale?
I think it's all over. I think it probably immediately started in the sheriff's sales, particularly right after the 2008 crisis, but now it really is just in the open market.
Is this retroactive as well to, corporations, LLCs that already own properties, like they would fall under this isn't just purchases, correct?
Yeah, so we are looking at mechanisms to best look at a retroactive policy, so that way we can encourage and maybe do a phase-in of divestment from those properties. That's still a conversation that we're having, and as the bill moves through the legislative process, we'll be having more pinned-down versions of what that looks like.
So then at this point, this is just barring future purchases. That's
at this point, yes.
You mentioned a 30% investor ownership rate in Northeast Minneapolis, or 25% or so in Philly. Do you have data that shows how that has impacted the numbers for rent, for example? Like how much are people paying more now because they're investors who are owning?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing across the marketplace is because of the influx of these investor-owned homes, it is making it harder for people to keep up with their rents because we don't have a limit on rents in Minnesota, so people can raise them to where they want. What we're also finding is the reports back from tenants who live in those places is that they're not getting the habitability issues that they need with the units that they're living in. So particularly as Senator Boldon talked about, many of these investors are out of state. They don't really keep up with the property, but they will call you on the first to get that rent. And so I think that what this bill does in both of our approaches is really trying to discourage folks from entering that market, particularly because we're dealing with people here and we're dealing with places where they live, and we want to make sure they're living in a safe, dignified place.
Would we be out front of the nation on this?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe that is a good characteristic of this bill.
As far as multifamily homes, they could buy up all the duplexes in Northeast, for example.
Yeah, this bill is only right now targeted at single-family homes.
And B was saying that the city, even though the city's supposed to be dedicated to maintaining naturally occurring affordable housing, that the city is buying up affordable housing and converting it to other things? Is that what you were saying?
What we're noticing is with public housing, so public housing is a form of affordable housing, but public housing is an option for our very, very, very poor community members. What's going on is that a lot of folks have experienced that they have gone through renovations, but they're going through them again for the purpose of demolishing their units, and then through that process of renovation, the ownership of these units no longer is public and gets transferred to a private owner or a private corporation, and when tenants try to come back to their units, they have found that their unit is no longer public, it's private, and the rent has gone up. And so that's currently what's going on, and it happens specifically with single-family homes in Minneapolis, yeah.
Address that?
This bill does not directly address that, but I think in kind of terms of just like changing the ecosystem, we want to ensure that the folks who are buying homes are actually, you know, government entities who are invested in providing housing for people or individuals who want to buy a home for their family.
Like fiscal projections on how this will impact the housing market in the short and long term yet? Or is that something that kind of is hard to project and predict?
It's a little hard to project, but I know the Federal Reserve has done some data on that, and they, you know, have been showing kind of what the effects have been over time as more investors get into this market. And other groups are also starting to kind of tease out that data of what it could look like in the future should other states follow our lead. All right, if no further questions, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here.